So in this video, we're just going to give a brief introduction here to some of the key players in the Hasmonean family, the Hasmonean Dynasty. So of course, we want to begin here with the father, Matthias. So this is the gentleman who um, rose up when living in a small town in Modin in Palestine. Then what happened was Antiochus Epiphanes was trying to force Hellenization. And one of the ways he was doing that was he was trying to get the Jews to abandon their laws and have them worship his gods or to participate in idolatry. And so one of his representatives came to Modin, where Matthias was living, and was trying to urge people in the town to come and to make the sacrifice. One Jew does step up and is going to do this, and Matthias, who comes from a priestly line, he is annoyed, outraged by this, and slaughters the Jew who is going to engage in this idolatrous practice and ends up killing Antiochus's representative as well. And so this really kind of begins the Maccabean fight, the Hasmonean family and their revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes. So Matthias is the father, and so a couple of the sons that he had, we have John and we have Simon. Simon's going to be quite a significant individual. He's going to really kind of lead things. He's going to be the head. Of course, there's Judas Maccabeus. He's the real warrior of the family. Of course, the term Maccabeus meaning hammerer to kind of describe his guerrilla tactic warfare. And so there's Judas. There's also Eleazar and Jonathan. But the one we're kind of going to be most interested in here is Simon, because he's really going to be the one who leads. Then Simon has sons. His sons are Judas, and then there is John Hyrcanus. So that's going to be the second son here. That's also going to be quite important. And then he has a third son, Matthias. So, but again, it's going to be John Hyrcanus who is going to take over once Simon is killed. He's killed by a son-in-law by the name of Ptolemy, and John Hyrcanus, is not with his father when this happens, and he's able to go to Jerusalem and try to hold down the fortress, because once Simon is dead, that makes the area kind of vulnerable for potential attacks by the Seleucid government, who have allowed the Hasmoneans to kind of run Judea as kind of a vassal state. They're allowed to practice their faith. They have the temple. They can continue to observe their laws, but they have to pay tribute to the Seleucids. And so all this arrangement was, okay for a time. But when Simon was killed, there was this opportunity that the Seleucids could come back in and take direct control, just annex Judea. But John Hyrcanus went to Jerusalem and was prepared to defend it. So for John Hyrcanus is going to be one of the very powerful Hasmonean. He's going to enlarge the areas that the Hasmonean families control. He's going to annex several different regions. And so we can say more about John Hyrcanus here in a little bit. So some of the other people for John Hyrcanus, he has a son named Aristobulus. He also has a son named Antigonus. And he has a son named Alexander Jannaeus. So according to Aristobulus first, according to Josephus, with Aristobulus first, Aristobulus was a very wicked ruler. So his father John Hyrcanus simply wanted him to become high priest, while the queen ruled. But Aristobulus um, ends up having his mother in prison, and then he has her basically starved to death. He also imprisoned his brother Antigonus, so he's a real rascal. But then later on, certain people in the kind of Judean court tricked um, Antigonus to fall into a trap, where then he was killed by Aristobulus's guards, because he was thought to be attempting to murder Aristobulus. So Aristobulus basically gets rid of the firstborn son, who people might have assumed would have been the ruler. Of course, this is some kind of dynasty, and of course, Jews have not had a long history with dynasties. Certainly since after exile, they didn't have really any kind of dynasty to go from. And so here with this one, we have Antigonus who is killed, but Aristobulus who kind of takes charge. So Aristobulus is also the first of these Hasmoneans who ends up wearing the title king. So he too also, like his father, John Hyrcanus, expanded the areas that they had control over. And he adds, and kind of significant for New Testament studies, he adds Galilee. So Galilee, the area in which Jesus ministered at first, where he grew up, this was annexed by Aristobulus the first. So when we talk about annexation, one of the things that's kind of important to remember is what happens is this land up here in Galilee then becomes available for Judeans in the south to go up and to populate it. So basically, you end up having something kind of like Judean colonists who will go up and start populating this area. So that happens under Aristobulus the first. But Aristobulus' health was not so good, um, and it went pretty poorly, and he died after reigning for really only a year. So he did quite a bit for some significant things in a short period of time. Then his brother Alexander Jannaeus takes over. So this name Jannaeus also kind of means Jonathan. So he ends up marrying Aristobulus' widow, Alexander Salome. And doing this, though, really offended a lot of Jews, because this is like incest, according to Leviticus. And so the high priest, which is basically what these Hasmoneans rulers are, they're not only the rulers, but they're also the high priest. And so, as a high priest, he's not supposed to marry a widow. So, there's a failed attempt to capture the port city of Ptolemais. But Jannaeus survived a political showdown with Cleopatra III, and he's able to enlarge the kingdom to really its greatest size. He annexes a great deal, especially the area beyond the Jordan and the Gaza and the coastal sites. So really, once again, extending the area. But he too had some serious flaws. He ended up crucifying about 800 Pharisees, and so he too had real kind of power. He also had those Pharisees' wives and children killed right in front of them before they were crucified. So Alexander Jannaeus did not make friends of the Pharisees. However, this is going to change with Alexander Salome. Upon his deathbed, Alexander Jannaeus urges his wife, who's going to rule as queen, to make amends with the Pharisees and bring them into power, because he was having to deal with the influence of the Pharisees, which was turning the people against him. So anyway, and she does this, so she distanced herself from the Sadducees, and so the Pharisees now get to have greater governmental influence under Queen Alexandra Salome. So we'll look here at this next two. So Alexander Salome has two um, sons. So Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. So with Hyrcanus II, he's high priest while his mother ruled as queen. And he is chosen, he's the oldest, so he was chosen to succeed her as ruler. Um, but he really basically abandoned his throne to his younger brother, Aristobulus II. Later, with the Idumean governor, so Idumea is an area or region in the vicinity. There's a governor there called Antipater. And with the king of the Nabateans, Aretas III, he tries to reclaim the high priesthood and the throne, but he's basically forced to leave Jerusalem by the Romans. So Aristobulus has this control. So Aristobulus served as commander of the armies while his mother, Alexander Salome, ruled. Though while his mother was extremely ill and expected to die, he led this kind of coup to take control of the kingdom. So he allowed his brother, Hyrcanus II, to live, but he had to give up his role as high priest. So when his brother came to reclaim the throne and the high priest, Aristobulus barricaded himself in the temple and stayed there until the Romans forced Hyrcanus out. So, but Aristobulus did not completely trust Rome, and he started to fortify the city. So Pompey came to Jerusalem then on the Day of Atonement in 63 BC, and he broke through the gates of the temple and took control. And when he did so, he killed priests as they were sacrificing and praying. So Aristobulus made a bad move, political move. He thought he could withstand Rome. He didn't trust Rome enough, and they sensed that, and so they came over and took the area. And when they did, they then made Hyrcanus installed as high priest. But Hyrcanus could not claim the title as king. So we then see that Hyrcanus II has a daughter named Alexandra. And Alexandra is going to marry the son of Aristobulus II, Alexander. So this kind of sounds like a Romeo and Juliet type of story. So these two end up marrying. I'll also mention that Aristobulus II has another son, Antigonus II. But the one we're really interested in here is Alexandria and Alexander. So these two will have a son called Aristobulus III. So Hyrcanus II has a grandson named after his brother, who basically, cheated him out of his role as high priest. And they also have a daughter named Merimee. So Merimee is of interest to us because Merimee is this princess, basically. So this is kind of like a kingly family. They're kind of like a monarchy. They're royalty. Even though Rome is going to come in and take charge, they're still kind of seen as this Jewish royalty. And Merimee is going to be one of the wives of Herod the Great. And they are going to have two sons, Alexander and Aristobulus. So Merimee decides to call one of her sons after her father and calls the other son after her brother or after her grandfather, or after her grandfather. So anyway, that's a little bit. And what's going to happen is Herod the Great thinks that Alexander and Aristobulus, his own sons, are going to try and take the throne from him. He ends up having them killed, and he also ends up having Merimee because he thinks she was behind it all, and so he ends up killing her as well. So that's a little bit there about some of these families. I'll just highlight a couple of things then from you're reading in Thomasino. So we mentioned Simon Hashmonean. So this is the Simon um, who ruled at first. So in 140 BCE, Simon and descendants were installed as high priest, governor, and military commander. John Hyrcanus captured Shechem and Mount Gerizim, and he's destroyed the Samaritan temple. So we talked about how John Hyrcanus extended territory. So one of these areas are where the in Samaria, and so the Samaritans had built their own temple, claiming that this was the place where God's name would rest, where God had authorized to be worshipped. So this was destroyed and laid in ruins, even up probably into the days of Jesus. So when Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman, and when she talks about worshiping on this mountain, she's probably talking about Mount Gerizim, where once stood their temple. He also captured Idumea, and he forced inhabitants there to become Jews. And so his territory was about as large as Solomon's kingdom. So he conquered quite a bit of area. Of course, Idumea is going to become important because this is where Antipater is governor, and Antipater is going to be the father of Herod the Great. So we have Aristobulus I, who mentioned was this ambitious and ruthless ruler, killing his own brother Antigonus, starving his mother to death, taking the title king, severing the separation of powers between the high priesthood and throne. He also increased Hellenism and territory. So it was quite interesting that here this movement that stood against Hellenistic efforts by Antiochus Epiphanes, a few generations later, has a ruler, though for a short time. He's basically increasing Hellenistic influences, Hellenistic way of life, and also he's increasing the territories that are being controlled by the Hasmoneans. And he required all Galileans, when he took over Galilee, to convert to Judaism. So we're going to have people who become Jews in Galilee, who, was forced to become Jews. And you're going to have Jews who are going to migrate to Galilee, colonizing the area. Also mentioned here about Alexander Jannaeus. This Greek word Jannaeus and Alexander. So he married Aristobulus' widow, Alexandra. So in 103 BC, he took the title king and the role of high priest as his brother had done. Took regions across the Jordan and along the coast, like in Gaza, and crucified 800 Pharisaic leaders, and thousands of Judeans fled out until Jannaeus' death. So this is going to take us basically then up to the time of Salome and then Alexander's two sons. So that's a little bit here about the aspects of some of the Hasmonean Dynasty out of your reading from Thomasino.